and welcome to the Courage Confidence Connections podcast. My guest today is John, and the reason I won't say his last name is I'm going to have him talk about his last name because it's very unique, and we're just going to have fun today. And welcome, John.
I I'm so glad just to be here. Happy New Year. Yeah, I get this a lot. If you look at I when I was growing up, I always thought my name was Knoernschild, John Knoernschild. Then when I started Googling, I was the only John Knoernschild in the world. And then I realized, wow, when you Google your name, oh, there's like five other John Knoernschilds like in the world. But most of my life, I was the only John Knoernschild. Then, so I started using my middle name because now I'm the only John Joseph Knoernschild. But, um, when you look at my name and it's Knoernschild, everybody pronounces it differently. And then they ask me, how do you pronounce it? And I just Knoernschild. And then my wife says Knoernschild. She says the K silently. And in my high school year, Herr Walter, my German teacher, says, no, 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 Hans. He says, it's Nirnschild.
Goodness.
And I'm like, hey, this was like rough enough. So I think that's why mom just named me John, and then it would be John K. But when
Excellent.
when you saw it, I think you said Child, which was like, wow, like pretty good, Janice.
Thank you.
But yeah, and then phonetically, people just look at it. They're like, do you say the K? Do you what? So when I feel German, Nirnschild.
That's great.
But my inner younger self, Knoernschild.
Excellent. Yeah. I love that story. And of course, you've explained it to me before. I think it's fascinating because it's so unique. And I grew up with a rather strange last name too. And we won't go there. That's when you interview me, I can talk about mine. But
But isn't this name thing, isn't it? Like the struggle is real.
it is. It is people that grow up as a Smith or a Jones, they don't get it. They just don't get it. Matter of fact, even my name, as short as it is, gets pronounced a lot of different ways. I say Debo. A lot of people say Debo, or that can get four letters and it can still get turned around. So,
Yeah, I like the DeBow. That's a little more, it's got a little more class to it. But I would think a lot of people just looking at it would be Debo.
they do. Yeah,
Yeah.
they
I
do.
I had nicknames in high school. Canorchi, what was for short. Um, they did, and then they said Norch,
Oh man.
But I did sports and the announcer always butchered it. But thankfully I was good at sports, so like they they knew. The people that knew me, they're like, "Ah." But, when we went in I did cross country, wrestling and track
Wow.
and I won a lot of races and so the local people, they knew. But then if I went to a new town or something, they'd go, John, that's me.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So it's fascinating. You've got a background image of brains. And of course, you and I've had many discussions. So, what is the name of your business? And why don't you just kind of tell me a little bit about it? But I'm really fascinated with how you got into what you do.
I have couple different businesses, entrepreneur. If you go to find me, it's Garden Samurai Coaching and Consulting. um www.gardensamurai.com. And so I'm known as the Garden Samurai, and I've had a history of gardening. My parents were gardeners, and I was a gardener since they said go out and mow the lawn. And I've helped four or five of my own employees start their own landscape companies. And I'm going to be a gardener for life, but I've been in the gardening business most all my life. I've bought and sold a couple landscape companies, and I consult and help people with that. But then um, during the pandemic, I had a mental health breakdown, and I've struggled with mental health challenges all my life. And I, I, I didn't even know, they're like, John, it looks like you have anxiety. And I'm like, no, that's just me, normal. But they're like, no, John, you got anxiety. I'm like, no, that I don't have anxiety and I don't have a mental health thing. That don't put any stigma on me. But obviously I came to a point, it's like, okay, yep, there's some issues here where I struggle with anxiety and depression and that kind of stuff. And I had a breakdown. But I became a Dr. Amen licensed brain health trainer. And I had a situation during the pandemic where I was running multiple businesses and helping out and doing some stuff. And we were buying a house, selling a house, and I had an anxiety breakdown. I ended up in the mental hospital, and I'm writing a book about it called Untangled Brain. It's getting close to its launch date. And so we tested all these medications and they didn't work very well on me. And I had no history of that. I just kind of made it without having to have those kind of antidepressant anxiety type medications. And so when I got out of the hospital, the doctor's like, we use these highly addictive benzodiazepines to like calm you down. And he's like, you're gonna have to find another doctor to get you off those. And during the pandemic, it was really hard to find any doctors. And I had a naturopath for 10 years and he retired right before the pandemic happened. So like it was tough to find counselors, different things. And I had suicidal thoughts, wanted to kill myself. It was brutal. And of course, we found a psychiatrist that was managing the stuff that I was on. And then my brother and multiple people said, "Hey, you should go watch this TED Talk video that Dr. Amen did." And I'm like, never heard of him. And he just talks about SPECT imaging brain scans and stuff. And it's like, I'm almost dead. At my worst point, I couldn't color in a coloring book and I couldn't put stamps on an envelope. And I was literally praying to God, hey, I don't want to wake up. Like if he could just have me go, because I didn't want to kill myself because that's like it's an effect to everybody else. But like if I just kind of went in my sleep, then it. But he didn't answer that prayer, so here I am.
Yeah.
And I remember the when they were doctor was asking me what kind of pain I was in. And I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like a 50. And it was more than just mental pain, mental illness doesn't address the pain that I was going through was mind, body, soul, and spirit. I had a spiritual breakdown, you know, um, and it was my brain, my body, and the pain was just so immense. But they're not going to let me take too much pain medication because that could take you out. And I ended up going to the Amen clinics, and they did some blood tests, and they were like, "You're low on vitamin D." So we upped my vitamin D and gave some nutraceutical things, looked at my diet. We did tests on glyphosate. So I had glyphosate in my body and stuff. And the standard Western medical system, they're not looking for nutrition deficiencies or hormone deficiencies. And so one of the things that happened to me is I couldn't get out of bed. Like I had zero energy. And oh, you must have depression, so let's stick you on these pills because that's what prescribers do. And Dr. Chapik, brain specialist at the Amen Clinic in Tukwila, Washington, did some tests and he was like, hey, your testosterone's a 300 on the scale of 200 to 900.
Oh,
And he's like, you ain't gonna be moving at all. Like that, but
yeah.
that's not depression. That's a hormone deficiency.
Mhm.
And so we remedied that, got it up to 700. Man, like a new young man. Like all of a sudden I could get out of bed and I could go, do this walk on the trail and do stuff that like I was gone. And so I'm like, I got to take this seriously, and then got certified as a brain health trainer, been studying that. I've had counseling and been studying psychology and all my life and philosophy and all of that. So that's where I'm at today. So now my BNI members, Dr. Ben Reeves, he says you're like the mind garden samurai, or you're the mindset garden samurai. And so I've been addressing myself more as a mindset and brain health coach.
Nice.
Um, I really think your mind is extremely important, and your brain. And Dr. Amen likes to say brain health, not mental illness.
Oh, good.
Mental health is even better, but
Mhm.
he's like it's really brain health. And Um, I always tell my clients, don't guess on your numbers. So here in the Pacific Northwest, oh, you need vitamin D. Well, how much? A
Mhm.
thousand, 2,000, 5,000 milligrams a day?
Yeah.
My niece, she was 25,000 milligrams a day low. For the first month, they had to do that and then stabled her out. But you can be low on vitamin D, and yeah, you'll be depressed, but doesn't mean you need antidepressant medication. And I'm not against medication. I think medication saves some people,
Mhm.
but if you're prescribed something and you want to kill yourself the next day, it's like, hey, you were talking about us
Mhm.
being aware of our own mind, our own body, and our own spirit,
Yep.
instead of always listening to everyone else.
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, when we were really young, there were limits on what we could say no to. So we did get programmed in a lot of things fairly young, but I think we keep buying into it, John. I think we keep, a lot of people don't know how to think for themselves or listen to their body. So I think this is very vital information. And you and I are kind of on that same track. So your business is helping people clearly. And in the area of brain health, and as we've discussed, I've studied the brain somewhat. I'm certainly not a brain specialist. However, there's a lot to it, isn't there? A lot to the brain.
I didn't want to give up my brand and my metaphor. I mean, it's like, yeah, I'm the garden samurai, and I encourage people to overcome the weeds in their life and plant a beautiful garden in your heart, soul, and mind.
Mhm.
And that weed, could be whatever it is you're struggling with. For me, obviously, stress, anxiety, um, those are like big weeds that we all struggle with.
Okay.
And if we don't manage our stress properly, I don't know if you've heard about the stress curve, but right at the top of that stress, that's maximum like productivity. Because if you have no stress, then you won't get off the couch. Like you just like, everything's good, you know, not worried about anything. But then the right there where you have the right amount of stress, you're gonna like function well. But if you go over that curve like I did, you'll slip down the slope, and then all of a sudden you're fighting for your life.
Yeah, I write a lot about that because I use a lot of scenarios, and a roller coaster is one I've used, you know, and I agree because we have to have some motivation. And so there is a type of good stress, but then most of it's bad because once your body, we're not animals and we tend to hang on to that cortisol building. Um, what do you call it? It's all the term has eluded me, but when it kicks in for a wild animal in the moment of an animal's chasing another animal, and it kicks in fight or flight. But human beings, we don't necessarily know how to get out of that, and it is a very bad cycle. So give me some thoughts. I know you studied all this. What are your thoughts on fight or flight? Any advice on how someone can take their if they
Well,
get it?
I think that fight or flight or freeze is real, and we have to kind of be aware of which one is going to be the best and in sentence of protecting ourselves. Um, and it's interesting who might be considered a predator. Like you could have a family member during the holidays and you're in their environment and an argument breaks out. you know what are you going to do? Are you going to fight? You just going to freeze up, or are you going to say, hey, you know what, it's time for me to go home?
Yeah, sometimes you absolutely have to walk away, and I've been in all those situations. I have. This is not my story. This is yours. But I do relate to that, and I have literally left a conversation. Sometimes I just left the whole place I was in, whether it be home or otherwise. And you have to be able to understand what's going on, be aware of what's going on.
Yeah,
And in recent years, we've seen the fight thing be just horrendous, and judging people, condemning people, and it's been a real heartbreak to see that. And I just, I had to learn years ago when I left North Carolina, I walked away from a very dangerous situation. And it was like, okay, I leave. And I did. But you're right, fight or flight, we have to be aware of what our best choices are going to be. Sometimes you can't leave a situation. Other
it
times, you have to choose to shut your mouth, right?
it it's tough. I think of situations where it's like, okay, I'm going to walk away to protect everything, and then that person's like, you coward.
Yeah.
And you're like, you're like whatever your Viking samurai, instincts or wherever it comes from. I'll show you who's a coward, then it's like, is this fight really worth it? But if we're not paying attention and we get kicked in our anger mode, they say you can't have a discussion or when someone is so angry, they're not going to hear you. So it's like trying to like calm them down to what it's like whatever you got to do to diffuse that, because when you're yelling at each other, you don't hear or remember any of that. All you remember is, wow, that didn't go well.
That didn't go well. So in your life experiences that you've been through and maybe even deal with some now, have you faced those situations where you've had to leave, or were you tempted to make it funny if you want to,
Uh,
because
Many, many times.
okay.
I'm 54, so it's funny. When I was growing up, I didn't. They afterwards they're like, "Oh, John, you lived in an abusive family," and I go, "Really?" I'm like, "Oh, I thought that was normal that the cops showed up regularly, and I knew them by name." But I'm like 6, and it's like I thought that's what happened when they got in an argument, and that's how they handled things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I had no clue that I was in a verbally abusive family.
Mhm.
Um, and I love my mom and dad,
Yeah.
but they've been through a lot. My mom, um, they bombed her city during the World War. Like she was in Tokyo where they dropped lots of bombs, and then Hiroshima was vaporized, Nagasaki was vaporized, and my mom's like, yeah, it was, the Twin Towers. She goes, that very sad. But she said my whole city looked like that. Then I went and looked up the old film and I went, wow, there are airplanes going over and like dropping bombs on the city. And she's like, they will kill you over a bowl of rice. So at the age of 12, my mom became a professional rice smuggler. And I'm like, okay, I get why you can, get a little defensive. And, you know, and it was always funny because my mom's Japanese and she'd be on the phone. Right? Yeah. And I'm like, my friends are like, is your mom pissed? And I go, oh no, that's her normal talking voice. Like she, yeah, you haven't seen her pissed,
My God. Oh, that's so funny, John. Of course, you know,
and
that's how she grew up. So your dad, did he grow up in a different type of situation? Obviously, if he wasn't Japanese, he
well,
didn't grow up in
yeah,
war.
dad was American. Our grand uh, parents came over across Ellis Island from like the German thing.
Okay.
So that the German side comes from my dad's side. And then he was a Kansas farmer, Kansas, and then became a military man, served 30 years in the United States Navy on a couple aircraft carriers, and he fought through like 4 wars, you know. So the nice thing was his dad was a God-fearing man of faith and did his best to be um you know a good person, and he really didn't like fighting, but sometimes he stood up like for his beliefs. And he struggled with anger, and I'm sure his grandparents struggle with anger. I'm sure on the other side. So then I was taught that, so I struggle with anger. And um, you just get angry at what you think certain things are injustice. I think of that scripture. It's be angry, but sin not. And then, of course, some Bible theologians are going to say, no, that ain't possible. There's no such thing as, right, man's righteous anger. There's only God's anger. But, I don't know. I struggle with anger. People get angry and use it for good um, instead of harm. Like if you get angry, don't punch someone, go out and chop some wood.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I've struggled with anger too. A lot of mine comes from trauma, and I think a lot of times it does come out of trauma that we get triggered, but if we can learn from it, I I've had problems, but a lot of that, this as a little candid here, I don't know if you've dealt with this, but I've dealt with being angry at myself, so the other people just got in the way, and the anger came from me. So when I started studying the awareness and understanding, looking at myself like someone else and go, okay, what pushed that button? Why did I get angry? And, the truth is, and you've heard this too, nobody can make you angry. We do make that choice. So, so what are your thoughts on that? And that's what I believe. I mean, you're welcome to,
Yeah, that anger thing's really interesting. I think that awareness and understanding and stuff, as I was growing up, my brother, he's 7 years older than me, he would say things and it just like he pushed my button and my fuse was short and I just blew up. And
oh,
and so then I would have said, no, my brother did it, and he's an antagonist, instigator, and he's the problem, and that's why I get angry. But I learned, okay, I got to carry a bigger shield. So when he does that, I climb behind the shield or my force field and then try to listen to what he's saying to me and not react. And if I can get to that level and not blow up, then he actually is like, wow, you didn't blow up and you heard me. And it's like, oh, now I got a different outcome. And it was like, maybe he was just unleashing his uh poisonous arrows or whatever, or unleashing his thing to be heard.
Yeah.
And instead of me taking his poison on, like just reflecting it out. But now, today, I can listen to my brother say stuff that I used to just take it personally and hurtful.
Mhm.
And now it's different and our outcome is different. And it's like, if I don't take that personal, then I'm less likely to get angry.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned the defensiveness earlier. And I grew up, I never knew I was defensive until I started really looking at myself and thinking about different triggers and reactions to people. And this is kind of a funny story. She's a very intense coach. And I was working with her for a few months and she got an email from me and she called me out on it and said, why are you so defensive and angry? And I didn't know. I'm like, the first thing out of my mouth was probably, I'm not defensive. Well, right there, I was defensive. I mean, and so she woke me up because she triggered me really bad, John. She triggered me really bad. And so what it did was it helped me to start looking at that. And it took me a while to really get free of that. And occasionally I feel it come up, but I literally can feel it in my body. I don't know if you have that experience.
Yeah, I could it's crazy. You can feel it swelling up and
Hmm.
it's like let's say you're like this dynamite TNT and the
Hmm.
fuse is lit and it's like how do I clip that thing because it's going fast and you're
Hmm.
like I don't want to blow up and
Yeah.
if you don't clip the thing you still blow up.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The one of the funny things is in a relationship I had recently and no longer have, is I was frequently told, "Why are you so defensive? You don't need to be defensive." And in that situation, the truth was I did have some reason to be defensive. But I heard that so much that when she said that, I think it triggered. And yet, triggers, even though we don't want to continue to live with them, when we get triggered, we need to look at it. We need to go, oh, like you did with your brother, and you change the dynamics of the relationship and that you change the energy. We've talked about energy before. Energy is very powerful and energy is very real. So he was putting out some really severe energy, and you, by transitioning it to hearing him, you changed the energy between the two of you.
Yeah, ironically, our relationship's, the best that it's ever been. But you know what? He's always gonna be the older brother.
Mhm.
So, and I'm gonna be the younger brother. And isn't it the older brother always knows better?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
the
So,
older, the oldest knows.
yeah, but I guess I learned to like, you know, I don't I don't have to believe everything that he's saying,
Mm-mm.
but I also have been given the power to hide behind my shield and not react.
Exactly, and that gives you time to process it, you know. and
Right.
and but it's really this brain stuff. We could probably have a 5 hour podcast and never.
Yeah, well, let's definitely do another one. I did want to invite people to our Untangled Facebook group.
Yeah.
Anyone listening, welcome to join that group. And Janice has a lot of her blogs on there. And so lots of good stuff. And we we have so much to be grateful for, but the challenges are real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want our listeners to know too that we don't diminish the challenges. And eventually, at some point with some of the challenges, I've learned to laugh at myself. So if you ever read any of my blogs, you'll know I c- I vocalize a lot of my uh fun times, but they weren't at the time. The hard times we just reflecting back, but we're going to be doing more of these. I think we'll probably wind up with a series and maybe even who
Yeah,
knows.
I'm excited for that. And laughter is medicine.
Mhm. It is. It is. I heard a story some time back about, matter of fact, I reread it recently. I think he was a doctor, but they said he had cancer. And he literally shut the door on the world and watched funny movies for I don't know how many days, and it was gone. He healed himself just laughing. Now, that's some wisdom we can take, you know.
Yeah. That is a great note to end on. Our podcast time here is up, but stay tuned for the next one. Um,
Absolutely. And
yeah, we 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 have so much more to share, but very grateful. And laughter is medicine.
thank you so much for coming on, John. And stay tuned for more to come. And we might even invite, as we do more of these, invite a guest or, to come on and discuss their business. So we're forming an alliance here, and hopefully we'll provide you with much more information and much more fun. And if you have a name that's hard to pronounce, we might need to do one on the names. Yeah. But anyway, thank you for everybody for watching. Thank you, John, for coming on, and we will see you soon. Janice Devo signing off.